My son's wife laughed at my clothes. Until the billionaire guest called me Mom. Family. It's meant to be a place where love feels safe, where age earns you honor, and where sacrifice is remembered. But too often, family is also where wounds cut the deepest. This is the story of Eleanor. A mother whose only crime was loving her son too much. A woman mocked for her simplicity, humiliated for her appearance, and silenced in rooms where she should have been respected. But as you will soon see, the same world that laughed at her old clothes would one day stand still in shock when a billionaire called her mom. Eleanor Matthews was 68 years old. Her face carried the soft lines of time, but also the strength of a woman who had lived through storms. She had been a teacher for most of her life, raising generations of children with chalk-stained fingers and a heart bigger than her salary. Her husband had died years earlier, leaving her to raise their only son, Daniel, alone. She sold handmade clothes at the market after school, walked miles to save bus fare, and skipped meals so Daniel could eat. She never complained. For her, motherhood was not a burden. It was her proudest title. But in Daniel's new world, those sacrifices were forgotten. Daniel grew up handsome and ambitious. He worked his way into a corporate job and soon met Vanessa, a woman who came from wealth, loved luxury, and despised anything that looked like ordinary life. When they married, Eleanor thought she had gained a daughter. But instead, she found herself losing her son. Vanessa saw Eleanor's simplicity as an embarrassment. She sneered at Eleanor's old handbags, rolled her eyes at her faded floral dresses, and always found a way to remind her that she didn't belong in their glittering world. Eleanor, with her quiet dignity, endured it. She never argued. She never raised her voice. But silence, my friends, can be a heavy weight when it's carrying humiliation. In their home, Vanessa controlled the atmosphere. If guests came, she would suggest Eleanor stay in her room so she wouldn't ruin the image. At family dinners, she would push expensive wine toward Eleanor and laugh when Eleanor declined, preferring water or tea. "You really don't know how to fit in, do you?" Vanessa would whisper, loud enough for Eleanor to hear. Daniel, caught between loyalty to his wife and love for his mother, often chose silence. And silence, in those moments, was louder than cruelty. Eleanor would go to her small room afterward, open her old wooden chest, and run her fingers over photographs of Daniel as a boy, smiling in stitched school uniforms, holding books she had saved months to buy. She would whisper to herself, "I raised him better than this, didn't I?" Still, Eleanor's love never wavered. She cooked meals for Daniel whenever she visited. She prayed for his marriage to be happy, even if she wasn't included. She pressed a handkerchief into his palm when he was stressed, just like she used to do when he was a boy. But Daniel had changed. Or maybe, the world had changed him. One evening, Eleanor overheard Vanessa on the phone, her voice dripping with excitement. "Yes, we're invited. The billionaire Alexander Grant is hosting a gala next month. Only the city's finest will be there." Eleanor smiled faintly. She remembered Alexander's name from the news. A man of staggering wealth and influence. But she also remembered something else. Something nobody else in that house knew. She leaned back in her chair, her heart stirring with an old memory. She said nothing. But destiny, my friends, was already weaving its threads. And so we begin with a mother silenced, a son blind to his own betrayal, and a daughter-in-law who measured worth by clothing tags and glittering jewelry. But the story was far from over. Because in the very room where Eleanor would face her deepest humiliation, the world would discover that love, kindness, and sacrifice never go unrewarded. Stay with me because what happens next will leave you breathless. Eleanor's mornings were always simple. A cup of tea, a prayer whispered into the quiet air, and a long glance at the old clock that had ticked faithfully for decades. But ever since Daniel's marriage, every visit to his house carried a shadow. It was supposed to be her son's home too, a place she had once dreamed of sitting with grandchildren, telling them stories the way she once told Daniel. Instead, every time she crossed the polished marble floors, she felt like an intruder. Vanessa made sure of it. It began with small comments. A laugh at Eleanor's handbag when she came for dinner. A sigh when Eleanor brought homemade bread instead of fancy pastries. "It's sweet, but really, this isn't the kind of thing our guests eat," Vanessa would say, tossing it aside as if it were nothing. Then came sharper words. "Daniel, your mother can't keep wearing those outdated dresses. People will talk." Eleanor would lower her eyes, fingers tightening around her worn floral fabric. She never answered. She had learned long ago that silence was easier than argument. But silence did not mean it didn't hurt. One evening, Daniel came home late, tired from work. Eleanor had cooked his favorite dish, beans and rice with fried plantains, just the way he loved when he was a boy. She set it carefully on the table, waiting for his smile. But Vanessa wrinkled her nose. "This again. Daniel needs proper food, not peasant meals. Just order something, I'll call the restaurant." Daniel hesitated, glancing at the steaming plate, then at his wife. And then he nodded to her. "Maybe just order in tonight." Eleanor's chest tightened. She quietly carried the plate back to the kitchen. Later that night, she ate the meal alone, each bite tasting more of tears than of salt. Still, she loved them. She tried to overlook it. She folded Vanessa's laundry when no one asked, dusted shelves when she visited, watered the plants that were always left to wither. She wanted to prove her usefulness, to remind her son of the woman who raised him. But Vanessa always noticed. "Daniel, tell her to stop touching my things. She doesn't live here. She's making the place smell like mothballs." Eleanor swallowed the sting and said nothing. One afternoon, she found herself alone in the living room. On the table was a silver frame holding a photo of Daniel and Vanessa smiling at their wedding. She picked it up slowly, her hand trembling. Behind that smile, she remembered the boy who once promised her he would always protect her. She whispered to the picture, "Where are you now, my son?" But Daniel never heard. He was too busy trying to keep peace between the two women he loved, and in that effort, he chose silence. What he didn't understand was that his silence was breaking his mother more than Vanessa's words ever could. In her small rented house that night, Eleanor opened her old chest again. Inside were Daniel's baby clothes, his first school shoes, letters he had written her in crooked handwriting. She pressed them to her heart. The memories were warm, but the present was cold. And yet, deep inside, she still carried hope. Hope that one day her son would see her again. Not as a burden, not as an embarrassment, but as the woman who gave him everything she had. She did not know it then, but life was already preparing a stage. A grand stage where her humiliation would reach its peak. And then, before the eyes of hundreds, her dignity would return in a way no one could have predicted. The air in Daniel and Vanessa's home buzzed with excitement the evening the invitation arrived. Vanessa's heels clicked across the marble floor as she tore open the golden envelope, her eyes sparkling. "A gala," she whispered almost reverently. "Hosted by Alexander Grant himself. Do you even understand what this means, Daniel? Only the city's elite are invited. Politicians, CEOs, celebrities. This is the kind of event that defines who we are." Daniel smiled faintly, though his eyes showed exhaustion from work. "That's great news, honey. It'll be good for your networking." "Our networking," she corrected sharply, waving the envelope like a victory flag. "And don't you dare let your mother come along." Eleanor was just in the kitchen, quietly rinsing dishes, when her ears caught the words. Her heart gave a little jolt, though she pretended not to hear. Vanessa lowered her voice, but not enough. "Imagine her showing up in one of those faded dresses, Daniel. Surrounded by million-dollar gowns, silk suits, dripping diamonds. Do you want your colleagues laughing behind your back?" Daniel hesitated, the same hesitation that always lived in him. Maybe she'd like to experience it. Just once. Vanessa scoffed. Experience it? That woman doesn't even know how to hold a champagne glass. She'll embarrass you. And me. The water slipped from Eleanor's fingers, the dish clattering softly into the sink. She stood frozen for a moment, staring at her reflection in the suds, her own face blurred by foam and water. Her throat tightened, but she kept washing, pretending she had heard nothing. Later that night, when they thought she was asleep in her small guest room, she sat awake on the edge of the bed. The moonlight spilled across the faded carpet. She opened her old trunk and pulled out her best dress, a pale blue floral one she had stitched herself years ago. She ran her fingers over the fabric, worn but clean, still smelling faintly of lavender soap. She remembered Daniel's graduation. She had worn this same dress while cheering louder than anyone else, holding a camera she borrowed just to capture the moment. She remembered his smile then, bright, proud, unashamed of the mother who stood in the crowd waving wildly. Her eyes watered as she whispered to the dress, maybe you'll do one more time." The days before the gala stretched like a heavy silence. Vanessa paraded around the house with shopping bags, calling friends to brag about the event. Eleanor stayed quiet, listening, absorbing every little reminder that she was not welcome. But deep inside her chest, a flicker of resolve grew. She would go. Not for the champagne, not for the chandeliers, not even for Alexander Grant. She would go because she was tired of being hidden. She wanted Daniel to see her, really see her, the way he once did. And so, without telling anyone, Eleanor folded the pale blue dress carefully, laid her old shoes beside it, and whispered a prayer. She had nothing expensive, nothing glamorous, but she had dignity, and sometimes, dignity walks quietly until it is forced into the light. What she didn't know was that the night of that gala would break her heart in front of hundreds, only to mend it in a way she could never have imagined. The night of the gala came wrapped in glittering lights and whispers of wealth. Eleanor stood in front of the mirror in her small room, smoothing the fabric of her pale blue dress. It was simple, old, and patched in places only she knew. Her shoes were polished until they almost shone, though the leather was cracked with years. She pinned her hair neatly, added a dab of powder to her cheeks, and whispered to her reflection, "You are enough. Tonight you are enough." When she arrived at the Grand Hotel ballroom, the world seemed carved from gold. Crystal chandeliers spilled light across polished marble, violins filled the air with soft music, and men in black suits escorted women draped in silk and diamonds. Eleanor's heart pounded. She clutched her small handbag tightly, her knuckles white as eyes turned toward her. Some were curious, some indifferent, but others smirked. And then Vanessa saw her. She froze mid-conversation, her lips curling into disbelief before turning into a sharp laugh. "Oh, Daniel," she said loudly enough for the nearby guests to hear. "Look who decided to show up." Daniel's eyes widened. "Mom, what are you?" But Vanessa cut him off, her voice dripping with sarcasm. That dress. I think I saw the same pattern in my grandmother's curtains. Did you dig it out of a thrift store bin?" She laughed, tossing her hair, making sure everyone around them noticed. The women at her table chuckled politely, though some glanced at Eleanor with a flicker of pity. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, opening his mouth as if to defend his mother, but no words came. He stared at the floor instead. Eleanor's face burned, though she forced a small, trembling smile. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the polished marble beneath her feet. She had known Vanessa would mock her, but hearing it here in this palace of wealth in front of strangers, it cut deeper than she imagined. As they entered the ballroom together, Vanessa kept her arm tightly looped with Daniel's, parading him like a prize while Eleanor trailed a step behind. Every glance, every whisper seemed to magnify the cracks in her old shoes, the faded threads of her dress, the quiet way she moved. At one point, Vanessa leaned close to another guest, smirking. "That's Daniel's mother. She doesn't really fit in here, but she insists on tagging along." The guest, a man in a tailored suit, chuckled. "Charity events do draw all kinds." His eyes swept over Eleanor like she was invisible. Eleanor lowered her gaze, her hands tightening on her handbag. Each word felt like a stone thrown at her chest. She told herself to be strong, to endure it quietly. But her heart whispered, "Why does my own son let me suffer like this?" She moved to the edge of the room, trying to blend with the shadows, away from the glimmering dresses and sharp laughter. She thought of leaving, just slipping out the back door, going home to her little room where at least the silence did not laugh at her. But then, from across the ballroom, the sound of trumpets cut through the chatter. Hush fell. Heads turned. The host had arrived. Alexander Grant, billionaire and philanthropist, walked in with quiet authority. The crowd straightened, eager to catch his attention, desperate to impress. Vanessa's eyes lit up, her grip on Daniel tightening. "This is it," she whispered. "This is the moment we make connections that matter." Eleanor stayed in the shadows, her heart pounding. She watched as Alexander moved through the crowd, his eyes scanning the faces. She didn't expect him to notice her. She didn't expect anything at all. But his gaze stopped, froze. And then, slowly, his expression shifted into something no one else in the room could understand. Eleanor's breath caught. The night was about to change forever. The music swelled, and the ballroom shimmered with laughter and clinking glasses. Servers glided between tables with trays of champagne, and the air was thick with perfume and pride. Eleanor stood near a gilded pillar, trying to shrink into invisibility, though she knew invisibility was impossible when humiliation had already painted her presence in bold strokes. Vanessa's laughter cut through the air like a knife. She clung to Daniel's arm as though showing him off were part of her jewelry, each smile crafted for those who mattered, each word meant to impress. "Mother insisted on coming," she announced to a small cluster of guests, loud enough for Eleanor to hear across the space. "I told her it wasn't really her kind of evening, but you know how stubborn some people can be." The group chuckled politely, their eyes flickering briefly toward Eleanor. One woman's lips curled into a sympathetic smile, but most were indifferent. To them, she was just another misplaced figure, someone who had wandered into a world that wasn't hers. Daniel shifted uneasily, his jaw tightening, but he said nothing. His silence rang louder than any insult. A waiter approached with a tray of champagne flutes, offering them around. Vanessa took one gracefully, then looked at Eleanor. "Would you like one?" "Oh wait, of course not. You wouldn't know what to do with it." She laughed again, a high, brittle sound. The guests around her joined in. Eleanor's cheeks burned. She lifted her chin slightly, clutching her old handbag with both hands, her knuckles pale against the worn fabric. Inside, her heart whispered, "Be still. You've lived through storms before. This is just another storm." But even storms left scars. Moments later, Vanessa guided Daniel toward the center of the room where the wealthiest guests mingled. She pulled Eleanor along behind them, but only so she could be paraded as a shadow. "This is Daniel's mother," Vanessa said at one table, her tone sugar-coated but sharp beneath. "She's very traditional. Doesn't she remind you of those charity cases we sponsor?" There was laughter. Someone muttered, "How quaint." Eleanor felt the floor sway beneath her feet. She wanted to leave, to run far from the golden lights and the cruel eyes, but a small voice inside urged her to stay. She had endured humiliation for years. Tonight would be no different, or so she thought. As she stepped back to the edge of the crowd, she caught sight of herself reflected in a tall mirror. The faded dress, the patched hem, her shoulders bent under the weight of shame. She barely recognized the woman staring back. She remembered the teacher who once stood tall in front of classrooms, the mother who had marched proudly at Daniel's graduation. That woman felt lost, buried beneath the smirks and whispers of this world. Vanessa's voice rose again, this time brighter, louder. "Alexander Grant is here tonight," she announced to anyone who would listen. "And when he sees us, he'll know we belong in his circle." Her eyes gleamed with hunger. She believed this night was hers to conquer. Eleanor tried to steady her breathing, her fingers tracing the edges of her handbag for comfort. She told herself she would survive this, that tomorrow she would retreat to her quiet home and this memory would fade into another ache. But then the trumpets sounded again, and the crowd parted like waves. Alexander Grant entered fully into the light, his presence commanding silence. The man who had built empires, The philanthropist whose name was carved on hospitals and universities, strode into the ballroom with calm authority. Vanessa straightened, her posture perfect, her smile gleaming. Daniel adjusted his tie nervously, ready to make an impression. Eleanor in her corner lowered her eyes, praying not to be noticed again. Yet Alexander's gaze moved across the room, scanning the faces one by one. When his eyes landed on Eleanor, something in him shifted. His steps faltered, his expression softened. And in that charged silence, the tide of humiliation that had drowned Eleanor all evening began to turn, though no one yet realized it. The stage was set. The moment was coming. And the world was about to discover who she truly was. Alexander's stride slowed as though the weight of memory had caught his feet. The crowd leaned forward, curious. He was supposed to head straight toward the dignitaries waiting at the front, yet his eyes were fixed elsewhere, on a figure most had barely noticed, the woman in the faded blue dress standing by the pillar. Eleanor felt at first like a flicker, a shadow moving in her direction. She glanced up, startled to find the billionaire himself walking through the room. His gaze locked on her. Her breath caught. Surely he wasn't looking at her. Surely she was mistaken. But he kept coming. Past the glittering gowns, past the hungry smiles of socialites, past Vanessa herself who lifted her chin expectantly, ready to greet him. He didn't slow, didn't glance her way. Vanessa blinked, confusion cutting through her polished mask. "Mr. Grant," she began sweetly, stepping slightly forward, but he brushed by her as though she were air. The silence in the ballroom was sharp now, every whisper swallowed. All eyes followed him until he stopped, right in front of Eleanor. Her hands trembled against her handbag. She lowered her gaze, unsure what to do, feeling exposed under the weight of hundreds of eyes. Then his voice, low and steady, broke the silence. "Mom!" Gasps rippled through the room. Champagne glasses paused midair, conversations froze. Vanessa's painted smile collapsed into disbelief. Daniel's eyes widened, his lips parting with shock. Eleanor's knees threatened to give way. She blinked rapidly, certain she had misheard. But when she looked up, she saw it in his face. Not pity, not politeness, but warmth, recognition, a love that had waited years. "Mom," Alexander said again, his voice thick with emotion. He reached forward and took her trembling hands in his. "Do you remember me?" Her mouth opened, but no words came. Memories flooded her. A small boy with tattered shoes, knocking at her back door, asking if he could borrow a book. A boy she fed with her own dinner portions. A boy she tutored at her kitchen table by candlelight when the power in his home was cut. She remembered calling him my second son, and the way he used to smile and call her Mom in return. Her lips trembled. "Alexander," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. The billionaire nodded, smiling softly, his own eyes glistening. "You gave me food when I was hungry. You gave me hope when the world turned its back. I have never forgotten." The crowd erupted in murmurs, shock spreading like fire. Eleanor stood frozen, overwhelmed, while Vanessa's jaw tightened, her hands clenching at her gown. Daniel looked from his mother to Alexander, confusion and shame battling across his face. Alexander didn't care about the stares. He pulled Eleanor gently closer, embracing her as though she truly were his mother. "I've searched for you for years," he said, his voice breaking. "And now here you are. My greatest honor tonight is not hosting this gala. It's finding you again." The room, moments ago filled with scorn and laughter, was now a stage of stunned silence. Every eye was on Eleanor, and for the first time that night, she no longer felt invisible. Eleanor's hands shook as Alexander kept hold of them, steadying her as though she might disappear if he let go. The room still hadn't recovered from the shock. People leaned in, whispering, their jeweled earrings catching the light as heads turned. The billionaire of the hour was calling this simple woman Mom. Vanessa's smile cracked completely now. She tugged Daniel's sleeve, hissing under her breath, "Do something, say something." But Daniel was frozen, his mouth dry. his eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before him. Alexander turned to the crowd, his voice rising with a calm authority that silenced even the most restless. "You see this woman here? This is my mother." Gasps echoed again. Eleanor tried to shake her head, embarrassed. No, I only looked after you for a while. I'm not truly." But Alexander squeezed her hand, cutting her off gently. "Blood doesn't define motherhood. Love does. And when I had nothing, no food, no shoes, no books, this woman gave me everything she could. She fed me when her own table was empty. She taught me to read when no one else cared. She clothed me with what little she had. She is the reason I stand here today." The ballroom fell quiet. The weight of his words settled heavy and undeniable. Eleanor's tears spilled over, her lips trembling as she whispered, "I only did what any neighbor would." "No," Alexander said firmly, his eyes shining. "You did what no one else would. You gave me dignity when I was invisible." The crowd broke into applause, soft at first, then swelling into something powerful, filling the ballroom with warmth. People who had looked down on Eleanor minutes ago now looked at her with awe. Some even rose to their feet. Vanessa's face flushed red, her fingers gripping her champagne glass so tightly it trembled. She tried to laugh to play it off. "Well, isn't that sweet? But really, we don't need to exaggerate." Alexander's eyes cut to her, sharp and unyielding. "Exaggerate?" His tone was calm but carried a sting. "Madam, without this woman's kindness, I would not be here. And without me, this gala, this empire, this world you are desperate to enter, would not exist as you know it." Vanessa faltered, her lips parting without sound. Daniel's shoulders slumped, shame washing over him as his mother stood in the spotlight, radiant in the very dress Vanessa had mocked. Eleanor tried to speak again, her voice breaking. "I never expected." Alexander smiled softly, brushing away her protest. "You never expected anything, Mom. That's why you deserve everything." The applause grew louder. Strangers came forward, offering their respect. Some bowed their heads, others whispered words of admiration. Eleanor's cheeks burned, not from shame now, but from the overwhelming force of honor pressing upon her. And in that moment the power shifted completely. The woman who had been laughed at for her clothes was now the most revered guest in the room. Alexander didn't let go of Eleanor's hand. He guided her gently toward the center of the ballroom, past the glittering gowns and the diamond-draped women who had mocked her minutes before. The violinists, sensing the moment, softened their music into something tender. All eyes followed. "This woman," Alexander declared, his voice carrying through the chandeliers and marble walls, "is the reason I stand here tonight. When I had no future, she gave me one. When the world forgot me, she remembered." Eleanor's chest rose and fell rapidly, her tears streaking down her cheeks as she shook her head. "I only did what a mother should do." Alexander's smile was full of reverence. "You did what an angel would do." The crowd erupted into applause again. Some guests stood fully now, clapping with sincerity that burned Vanessa like acid. She glanced around, desperate for someone to share her disdain, but every face was turned toward Eleanor. The very people she had longed to impress were no longer listening to her. They were captivated by the woman she had tried to bury in shame. Daniel stood like a statue, his face pale. He looked at his mother as though seeing her for the first time. His silence had always been his shield, but now that shield felt like betrayal carved in stone. Alexander slipped off his own tuxedo jacket and draped it over Eleanor's shoulders, the gesture quiet but thunderous in its meaning. "You will never feel out of place here again," he said softly. "Not while I live." A murmur rippled through the room. Some women dabbed at their eyes, men nodded with approval, and even the waitstaff straightened their posture, suddenly proud to serve in this hall. The billionaire had chosen his true royalty, and she wasn't wearing silk or diamonds. She was wearing an old blue dress stitched with love. Vanessa couldn't contain herself. She stepped forward, her voice sharp, trembling with panic. "This is ridiculous. She doesn't belong in this world." Look at her. Look at what she's wearing. The words hung in the air like poison, and the crowd recoiled. A few guests gasped. Others shook their heads. Alexander turned slowly to face her, his expression hard. You measure worth in fabric and jewelry. I measure it in sacrifice and love. Tonight, you revealed who you are just as clearly as I revealed who she is. Vanessa's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Her cheeks burned crimson, the laughter she once used as a weapon now dead on her tongue. Daniel finally stepped forward, his voice unsteady. Mother, I should have defended you. I let you suffer in silence. His eyes brimmed with guilt as he bowed his head before her, his shame spilling across the marble floor. Eleanor touched his arm gently, her forgiveness rising even through her hurt. She didn't speak, but her touch was enough to make him tremble. And in that grand ballroom, the power that had been ripped from her for years returned in full. Not through revenge, not through shouting, but through the undeniable truth of who she was. The woman mocked for her clothes now stood taller than every jewel in that room. The clapping faded into a tense silence, broken only by the faint strains of the violins. Vanessa stood stiff, her smile gone, her hands shaking as she tried to hold onto the last scraps of control. She looked at Daniel as if begging him to speak for her, but Daniel lowered his gaze, the shame too heavy to carry. Alexander stepped closer, his voice firm but calm, echoing through the ballroom. Respect is not stitched into gowns, nor measured in diamonds. It is written in the lives we touch. And tonight, the world has seen whose life is richer. Vanessa's lips trembled. You don't understand. I just wanted us to belong here. I only wanted people to take us seriously. The billionaire's eyes narrowed. By humiliating the woman who gave you the man you married. By tearing down the very roots of the tree you now rest under. His voice cut like steel. That isn't belonging. That is disgrace. Guests murmured in agreement. Some looked at Vanessa with disgust. Others turned away entirely, as though her presence now carried a stain. Daniel swallowed hard, his voice breaking when he finally spoke. Mom failed you. I let her words wound you, and I stayed silent. Tonight I see it clearly. You deserved my defense, not my silence. He dropped to his knees before Eleanor, tears brimming. Can you forgive me? Eleanor's own tears fell, but they were not bitter. She reached down, lifting her son gently by the shoulders. A mother's heart forgives before the words are spoken, she whispered. But my son, learn from this silence. Let it never be your answer again. The guests erupted into applause once more, moved by her grace. Even in her moment of triumph, she did not choose cruelty. She chose mercy. Vanessa's face twisted, her pride collapsing under the weight of the scene. So what now? She demanded, her voice cracking. Do I just stand here and be humiliated? Alexander turned, his tone icy. No, you stand here and learn. Learn that every empire, every fortune, every title begins with someone who sacrificed. And if you cannot honor that, then you do not deserve the place you seek. The words hit harder than any slap. Vanessa staggered slightly, her breath shallow, her eyes darting around the room searching for someone, anyone to defend her. But no one did. The ballroom that once hung on her every polished smile now looked through her like glass. Daniel took Eleanor's hand in both of his voice breaking again. From this night on, you'll never stand in the shadows again. I promise. Eleanor's heart trembled, not with pain this time, but with the strange sweetness of being seen at last. She nodded gently, her eyes glistening. Alexander looked at her, his voice softer now. Mom, I want you by my side. Join my foundation. Let the world hear your wisdom. Let them know the woman who raised me is more than the dress she wears. The crowd clapped again, louder, stronger, a wave of respect crashing over the ballroom. And in that moment, Vanessa's laughter, Daniel's silence, the years of humiliation, all of it crumbled into nothing. Eleanor, the woman mocked for her clothes, had risen higher than anyone could have imagined. The ballroom lights seemed softer now, as though even the chandeliers bowed to the moment. Eleanor stood at the center of it all. Her faded blue dress no longer a symbol of shame but a banner of honor. The applause faded into a quiet reverence, the kind reserved for queens and saints. She turned slowly, her eyes sweeping across the crowd, faces she did not know but who now looked at her with respect. Her voice was low, trembling but strong enough to be heard. I never asked for riches. I never dreamed of rooms like this. All I ever wanted was for my son to have a life better than mine. If I gave too much, it was only because I loved too much. The room was silent. Even Vanessa, clutching her glass with white knuckles, had nothing left to say. Daniel's head bowed, tears slipping down his cheeks. His hand clutching hers like a lifeline. "Mother, I don't deserve you," he whispered. Eleanor cupped his face, her thumb brushing away a tear. "You are my son. That alone is enough." Her words were forgiveness and warning, love and lesson, all in one. Alexander stepped closer, his arms steady around her shoulders. "From this night on, the world will know you as my mother. And I will make sure every kindness you once gave me is returned tenfold." His words were not boastful, they were a vow. The audience rose to their feet, applause thundering now, some even crying openly. For once, wealth bowed before humility. For once, the richest man in the room was not the one with the deepest pockets, but the woman in the patched dress. Vanessa shrank into the background. Her earlier cruelty now her own prison. The glittering jewels on her neck could not hide the humiliation etched on her face. She had wanted to climb high, but in mocking Eleanor, she had fallen lower than anyone. Daniel squeezed his mother's hand, his voice raw. "Never again will you walk into a room alone. Never again will I let silence be my answer." Eleanor nodded, her heart full. She had been bruised, belittled, and overlooked, but tonight the truth had been spoken in front of the world. Dignity, once buried, had returned. The violins swelled again, this time brighter, as though the music itself celebrated her. Alexander raised his glass, his voice steady. "To the woman who gave me life when I had nothing. To the woman who gave Daniel life when he had everything. To our mother." Glasses lifted around the room, and for the first time, Eleanor felt what it was like to be truly honored. Not for wealth, not for status, but for love. Later that night, as the gala ended and the guests drifted away, Eleanor stepped outside into the cool night air. She looked up at the stars, whispering softly, "William, my love. Do you see this? Our boy is finally proud of me again." Her late husband's name floated into the night, carried on the wind. She smiled through her tears. And so it ended, not with revenge, not with bitterness, but with justice clothed in love. Because sometimes, the woman they laugh at for her clothes is the same woman the world will one day stand to applaud. And that, my friends, is the power of a mother's dignity. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more. Because here, in Jennifer's stories, family may hurt the most, but love always finds its way back. Thank you for watching, my friends. Remember, dignity and love always shine brighter than gold.